Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Digitally. Skilling in the age of AI. This is an important topic, and according to the World Economic Forum, 44% of workers' skills will be disrupted in the next 5 years. Literally, that means nearly half of what I do, what we know to do today, will have to be relearned or reimagined in the age of AI. And to unpack this really important topic, I've invited someone who I trust, work with, and he brings an incredible slate of experience for the discussion at hand. He spent 30 years helping B2B companies create strategies to raise their performance. He was Chief Strategy Officer at Nielsen, a big data company. And then he spent time in digital and AI as he was the Chief Digital Strategy Officer at Boeing, a large aerospace and defense company, right in the time as they were in the center of driving their generative AI agenda and adoption at scale. And so I thought I would take all of that learning and experience, Mark, that he brings, and bring that to the discussion today on upskilling and reskilling the workplace in the age of generative AI. Welcome, Mark Leiter.
Thank you, Sanjay. Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks again for joining us, Mark. And look, when I first met with you, you were the Chief Digital Strategy Officer at Boeing, and one of the comments you made to me, I remember still, is, Sanjay, what are you talking about AI? We've been at it for decades now. Tell me a little bit about the changing nature of AI, the generative AI has brought to the market.
Yeah, so it's interesting you talk about the age of AI. I think we've been in the age of AI for at least 40 years. It just became more topical recently with the latest advancements. So for everybody, think about your GPS nav system that tells you where to go, how to get there, predicts down to the minute when you're going to arrive. Fraud detection systems that spot a spurious transaction on your credit card, weather forecasting, which is now quite accurate versus where it was decades ago. We can thank AI for that, cybersecurity, and even driverless vehicles. So AI is really everywhere, and it's just really the new generations of AI, generative and then now agentic, that's capturing everyone's attention.
So listen, AI has been around for a long time, and yet this conversation has taken a scale and a size and a meaning across boardrooms around the world that is new and different. Why so?
Well, again, all those decades of AI to me were about decision making. How do I get from here to there? Is this a fraudulent transaction or not? Generative AI comes along a few years ago, actually longer ago in terms of its origins. You can go back 10 years ago where media companies were using Gen AI to draft articles. But it becomes very popular, obviously, when OpenAI drops ChatGPT on the world at the end of 2022. And that's the beginning of a shift from decision-making to design thinking. And that is a big shift and unlocks a tremendous amount of excitement, enthusiasm, and a whole new way of working with AI on the front lines. It also requires a whole new set of skills.
So decision-making to design thinking, I hadn't heard that before. That's an interesting term. Why is that? What do you see changing about that equation?
The big distinction is the earlier versions of AI, fraud detection, GPS, weather forecasting, was available to everybody, regardless of user skill. The new generations, especially generative, where you are interacting and you're having a conversation and you're generating new content, now it's the marriage and the bridge between your authentic intelligence as a user and the artificial intelligence on the other side. So I think it's the authentic intelligence variance is a bit of the bottleneck in the gap right now, where you have to reskill people, not just to think about how the tools work, but to even lift their own generative capabilities to get more out of the tools. And that's also a pretty big fundamental shift from where we've been. And by the way, and that's not just generative, that's almost all software. All software is gaining intelligence. All software is going to be more interactive. We've always had skill variations, but even more important now.
Yeah. And I think what you're really driving to is the fact that as we've gone from predictive AI to generative AI, we've also democratized the availability and use of AI. And so it isn't just restricted to the machine learning engineers or really specialized subset of kind of the employee base. All of a sudden, we're talking about the entire workforce using, adapting, put into productive use these kinds of capabilities. And I think that's part of why we have this skilling challenge that we see across corporations. Then I think that kind of squarely brings up this topic, which is skilling, reskilling of the workforce. And talk to us a little bit about, what's new, what's different, and then how do you even start approaching something like that?
Yeah, well, first, I would say be wary of broad brush proclamations of what to do. Every company is starting from a different position. You mentioned Boeing, where I was at. Boeing has 70,000 engineers and technologists. Has been working with AI forever. Does autonomous space travel and factory automation. Starts from a very high level of development in terms of AI knowledge and capabilities. Other organizations are in very different starting positions. So that's one. And then some of it's also related to industry. How an ad agency might use generative AI on prose and images and video, very different than industrial manufacturers who are thinking about engineering design practices, customer support, even structural designs. There are 3D generative AI systems that if you want a structure that's 10 times stronger and 5 times lighter in 3 dimensions, it can generate it for you. So know your starting place, know what you need to do, and then you can get into upskilling and reskilling, and I've got a few thoughts I could share there on the how that happens.
Okay, so that being the case,
Yep.
how do we make progress through this?
Yeah, good. So I think there's a few things. One is beyond understanding your starting position and current state is like you do need to invest in basic learning programs. I wrote an article recently that said Gen AI is more about the people than the technology. Turns out the technology, certainly for a generalized LLM powered by ChatGPT or similar, is relatively affordable. That's not the big investment. The big investment is teaching people how to use it. What I experience in a few environments is the first thing people tend to do if they haven't used it before is they approach it like a search engine. And that's sort of a byproduct of the UX. We're used to that little box and typing in a question to search for something. It's not a search engine. It's a conversational thought partner. So you need to actually teach people that. It's the reason when we rolled out a generalized LLM at Boeing, we called it Boeing Conversational AI, just to reinforce that you're going to have a conversation and it actually could be about any topic. But again, the insight is it's not intuitive. You have to teach that. Part of teaching that also I found that's very helpful is peer mentoring with power users. In every organization today, some people, regardless of how they got there, have already been using Gen AI now for several years. They really love it. They've put it to work. They've put it to action. You want to get those people out on the road, demoing it for their other teams, leadership teams, showing them real live examples from your own company of like, this is how we're making it work. This is how we use it. And then the ability to ask all the live questions that come with that conversation. Third, I would just talk about incentives.
So
go ahead.
No, after you.
Okay, so I was just going to add on incentives. Over decades of software and even business, we've become a productivity-obsessed society and business environment of trying to measure productivity and efficiency for everything. And for things that are very mature, that makes sense. But for breakthrough technologies, I would give a big caution flag. Like maybe what you want to be measuring is learning velocity and adoption right now, experimentation, not so fast to productivity. I'm sure there's at least a few people in the audience who remember the introduction of spreadsheets and word processing. Nobody was talking about productivity when those tools came out. Nobody is still talking about productivity with those tools that we all use every day. But for this one, again, it's breakthrough. I think like encouraging people to use it, try it, celebrate their successes, share what they're learning, share what they're doing with it. That is so critically important. The efficiency will come, I've heard from many executives who are saving already millions of hours in terms of rolling out these tools. They don't always know where those hours are going yet. That's a different story. But they do know they're actually delivering back that savings.
That's right. And you know, look, the reality is just slapping AI, generative AI on top of an existing process actually doesn't really return, right? Like you have, as you said, about changing the way you work and thinking about it differently is the key. And you have to change your the way you approach the problem, the way you look to solve it, the way you design your operating model, and the way you put it to use. So I think it's critical. Look, you've led the learning across very large organizations. I would say very large, you know, already skilled organizations, if you will, with deep technical expertise. And so what is the one thing that you take away from that experience that you want to share with our group here?
Can I have two? Two things. Excuse me. So one is you need to play the long game. And so upgrading human generative skills is very important in this one. So you're going to get out of the software what you put into it. Narrative and conversational skills, the better you are at carrying the conversation on your side, the more you get back. Critical thinking skills, Gen AI is not perfect, we know that. And so you really have to critically examine the content that's coming back at you. And then creativity. These are all skills we can work on as people, but and the creativity really drives all the creative uses that you could think of putting into motion to extract value from this. But I encourage organizations, skill your people in some of the same fundamental generative capabilities in their human brain, and they will get more out of the software that they're using.
What's the other one?
And then the other one is a little bit of a pivot, which is I think Gen AI has arrived at just the perfect time when our classic 30-year apprenticeship model is under a lot of pressure. I have observed, we've probably all observed, you know, I get a lot of resumes from people who are 10 years out of school and they've already worked for 5 or 6 companies. People are switching careers faster, companies faster, roles faster. There's a huge revolving door for top talent. It only spins faster. And so if you're in a company, like a big engineering company, it might take 30 years traditionally to grow a master chief engineer. Well, you need people to stick around. And if they're going to be leaving for a different job or company in 5 or 10 years, how do you capture that knowledge? How do you really codify that domain expertise? And Gen AI and Agentic too, together, are fabulous platforms for ingesting all that knowledge, making sense of it, making it available on demand, both in, I think, what will increasingly be digital classroom and individual classroom learning experiences, so they can build the skills they need, and sometimes they will learn together. I'm a big believer of learning together for some of these foundational skills is critically important, but also individually on demand, you know, at the point of doing a task.
Yeah. So what you're really saying is learning in the age of AI is critically important, not only because it provides the skilling that's important for creativity and productivity and long-term sustainable competitive differentiation for your company, but actually, in addition, and I didn't realize this when we started the conversation, what you're saying is that it also builds the knowledge base and captures the context and the cultural DNA that can help with this revolving door problem as well, as indeed workforces are getting more and more sort of in this environment where they sort of move around quite a bit.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then, by the way, I think this is why it's critically important for senior executives to be very familiar with the technology. There's been a lot of software that's come along beforehand, and there's passing familiarity. Really understanding the power of AI and what it can do to transform the organization, transform how people work, how they learn, how they grow, how they develop. You know, it's going to be very hard to be an executive and be successful and not really understand technology broadly and AI specifically.
I love it. Mark, it's always amazing speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person very soon. Take care.
Sure. Look forward to seeing you too. Thanks, Sanjay.